All right, let's jump right into this explainer. If you're a med student staring down a microbiology review, you are in the exact right place. Today, we're heavily focusing on a few key differential diagnoses you are absolutely going to see on the wards and, for sure, on your board exams. We've got vaginal discharge and the Neisseria genus on deck, so let's get into it. Here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with analyzing vaginal discharge, do a quick profile on Trichomonas vaginalis, break down bacterial vaginosis, meet the Neisseria family, and wrap up by pitting Meningococcus against Gonococcus.
Section 1, Analyzing Vaginal Discharge, the Differential Diagnosis.
So let's set up our first major differential. We are comparing Trichomonas vaginalis directly against Bacterial Vaginosis, or BV. Both of these present with that classic foul-smelling, fishy vaginal discharge. And honestly, it's super easy to get tripped up here if you aren't paying attention to the underlying mechanisms. The absolute fundamental difference you've got to memorize is where they come from. Trichomonas, that is an infectious protozoan parasite, and crucially, it's a sexually transmitted infection, an STI. BV, on the flip side, isn't really an outside infection in the traditional sense. It's actually just an overgrowth of normal vaginal flora. This happens when the vaginal pH creeps up above 5.5, which, often happens under the influence of progesterone during pregnancy. Section 2. Trichomonas vaginalis profile, the STI presenting with pruritus. Okay, let's look at the clinical profile for Trichomonas. Notice how it presents with a lot of active inflammation. The absolute hallmark symptom here is genital pruritus, so severe vaginal itching. When you do your exam, you're going to see clear active signs of vaginitis. The typical demographic is usually females between 20 and 40 years old. But here is the massive clinical pearl. Because it's an STI, treating the partner is non-negotiable. You literally have to treat the partner to prevent the patient from just passing it back and forth. Section 3. Bacterial Vaginosis breakdown, normal flora gone rogue. Now, because BV is a flora overgrowth, you're not just dealing with one bug. Multiple bacteria go totally rogue here. The specific pathogens that overgrow are Gardnerella vaginalis, Peptostreptococcus, bacteroids, Mycoplasma hominis, and Mobiluncus. Seeing these complex names spelled out in the captions should help lock them into your memory for exam day. Remember, it's a mixed microbial picture, not a single culprit.
So, how does BV actually walk into your clinic? Well, unlike Trichomonas, your typical BV patient might be a pregnant female complaining of that fishy discharge. And this is a huge distinguishing factor, she won't have genital itching, zero pruritus. And when you examine her, there are absolutely no signs of active vaginitis. The tissue just isn't inflamed like it would be with an STI. Which brings us to the investigation. If you ever see the buzzword clue cells on a test, stop right there. You've got your answer. Clue cells are basically these stippled vaginal epithelial cells you see on microscopy of the discharge. And this is your go-to investigation for BV. You might be wondering, why not just culture it? Well, a culture would just show a giant mixed growth of all those normal flora pathogens we just talked about, which is totally useless for making a specific diagnosis. So always rely on those clue cells. And this right here is exactly why BV is such a big deal clinically. It's not just some minor nuisance. If you leave it unchecked during pregnancy, it can snowball into chorioamniotis, which is a dangerous infection of the fetal membrane. And that inflammation, it can eventually trigger PROM, preterm rupture of membranes. It's a perfect example of high-yield OBGYN and microbiology crashing into each other. Now, check this out. While their microscopic investigations are night and day, Trichomonas gives you that motile flagellate parasites and BV gives you clue cells, the clinical treatment is exactly the same. Both get treated with oral metronidazole, 400 milligrams taken BD, so twice a day, for 5 days. It's kind of nice when things line up perfectly like that, right? All right, so we've covered a major STI and a flora overgrowth. But how does this compare to other major mucosal pathogens you're expected to know about? Section 4. Meet the Neisseria family. Pathogens of the mucosa. Let's kick this off with a golden rule from the source material. Gonococcus has great affinity for mucosas. That specific behavioral trait is the literal driving force behind its entire clinical presentation. It just loves to target the mucosal linings of the genitourinary tract. So we're going to do a side-by-side comparison of Neisseria meningococcus and Neisseria gonococcus. Just like with our vaginal discharge differential, mastering these two completely depends on spotting their structural and biochemical differences. Section 5. Meningococcus versus Gonococcus, the biochemical divide.
Okay, the structural divide here is absolutely crucial. Neisseria meningococcus has a protective capsule. That capsule lets it survive in the air, which means it's transmitted via respiratory droplet infection. Gonococcus, on the other hand, has no capsule. Without that environmental armor, it literally cannot survive outside the body, so it requires direct, intimate mucosal contact, which makes total sense for an STI, right? Form completely dictates function here.
Let's see how that translates to the lab. Both of these guys utilize glucose, so that won't help you tell them apart. But look at maltose. Meningococcus ferments maltose, while Gonococcus does not. Next up, beta-lactamase activity. It's totally absent in Meningococcus, but it's actually present in over 16% of Gonococcus strains, which makes treating it with standard antibiotics a real headache. Finally, going back to that capsule, because Meningococcus has one, we've been able to make a vaccine for it. Gonococcus has no capsule, and spoiler alert, there is no vaccine available for it.
As we wrap up this explainer, I really want you to think about this. Isn't it wild how microscopic differences, like having one single sugar fermenting enzyme or a tiny cellular capsule, can completely dictate a pathogen's clinical outcome, how it spreads, and whether or not we can even make a vaccine for it? Knowing these tiny biochemical quirks is the ultimate cheat code for unlocking the right diagnoses. So, what other microscopic details are hiding in plain sight, just waiting to change the way we treat our patients? Keep that in mind next time you're reviewing for the boards.